Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to my Wednesday noon podcast. Today's talk is on the five hindrances and the importance of being very gentle with ourselves as we're engaged in Dhamma practice in developing the Eightfold Path. I say this often in my classes, and it's come up a few times with some online students, so I thought I'd address what I mean by being gentle. So I'd like to start with just saying the most gentle and loving thing we can do for ourselves, and then for all other human beings, is to take to the Dhamma and awaken. The Buddha awakened to the profound understanding that it was ignorance of Four Noble Truths that led to all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing suffering. And so as an individual contributions to our own suffering, that is rooted in ignorance. And so in a overarching sense, the most gentlest thing we can do for ourselves is to develop an understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And of course, that's done through the Eightfold Path. So the guiding principle for gentleness towards ourselves and towards all other people is to develop the Eightfold Path. When we see pictures of the Buddha, they're always showing this very gentle countenance, and that still comes through 2,600 years later. So in general, the most gentle thing we can do for ourselves is to awaken. Now, within the specifics of Dhamma practice, it's always a lack of gentleness with ourselves that gives us the most difficulty in Dhamma practice, whether it's on our cushions during meditation, where we simply get frustrated, or it's off our cushion in our moment-by-moment life, where we're acting in ways that are contrary to being gentle with ourselves and gentle with others. So the Buddha taught five hindrances that were common, that he noticed 2,600 years ago, common hindrances that were developing within the members of the Sangha, and that he simply observed, and people struggle to maintain wrong views of self. So the first hindrance is the need for constant sensory stimulation. That often comes up in meditation, especially early in meditation, but even in meditators that I've known for many, many years, that I should say have been meditating for many, many years. And that comes up as boredom. And what is boredom except the immediate need for some type of sensory stimulation right now? So for many of us, when we're first starting in meditation, the idea of just sitting quietly for only a few minutes and being mindful of the sensation of breathing in our bodies is almost too much to bear. And it's one of the reasons why I suggest that anybody starting a meditation practice or reinvigorating a stalled practice is to start with very short periods of meditation, because anything more than 3 or 4 or 5 minutes for most people is simply going to be unbearable, and you'll just conclude that you can't do it, and maybe never come back to a practice that will completely change your life. So being mindful of that it's a common hindrance, the need for sensory stimulation. What do we do with it? Rather than judge ourselves harshly or to push ourselves too hard, which is simply another way of not being gentle with ourselves, to start with short periods of meditation. And even if we find ourselves, excuse me, having a well-established meditation practice, but getting into some meditation sessions that are just too uncomfortable, it's okay to cut some practices short, some meditation sessions short, and pick them up again later. And recognizing that the need for constant sensory stimulation is the self-referential ego self, the self-referential ego personality, that which the Buddha describes as anatta, not a self. That need or boredom comes up because the self-referential ego personality is starving for attention in that moment. There's nothing going on that it can establish itself in. One of the reasons why simple breath meditation is so powerful is that it's very, very difficult to establish wrong views of self when we're constantly being mindful of the sensation of breathing in our bodies. And just to get off the subject slightly, I've just published a rather long article on the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha's general instructions for breath meditation, breath mindfulness meditation, shamatha vipassana meditation, and that's just been posted on the website. And we're going through a series of talks in our classes here in Frenchtown based on that. And now that the context is established in the Anapanasati Sutta, I've changed slightly the meditation instructions, the guided meditations, and those are posted on the website now too. It just gets a little bit more specific about being mindful of the arising and the passing away of our breath, the arising, being mindful of our in-breath and our out-breath, so as to deepen our understanding of the impermanence of all things. And that leads back again to the common hindrances to practice. The need for constant sensory stimulation, that first hindrance, is because things aren't changing fast enough in our own minds. It's not enough in that instance when we're on our cushion to simply be mindful of the arising and passing away of our breath. So in our meditation, if boredom becomes an overriding issue, initially, just recognize that hindrance, that first hindrance has come up, and come back to the sensation of breathing, and be mindful of the in-breath and the out-breath. Be mindful of the arising and passing away of all phenomena, including the arising and passing away of boredom. If you can stay with your breath, that sense of boredom should fall away, and something else might come up in your meditation. The self-referential ego self will throw all kinds of things in its way, in the way of deepening concentration, to continue to ignore its own ignorance. The next hindrance that often comes up in meditation, and this directly relates to gentleness towards ourselves and others, is ill will. And often that ill will will arise during meditation by judging ourselves harshly, and that comes up in many different themes that I'll mention just a little bit further on in this talk. But any time that we're judging ourselves harshly is an act of ill will. And oftentimes, if we're bringing harsh judgments of ourselves or others into our meditation, in other words, maybe we had an argument with someone and we're still carrying it around, and we bring that into our meditation, that's always going to prove to be a distraction when we're just playing over and over again an unpleasant encounter with someone else, or playing over and over again harsh judgments of ourselves that we should be doing something better. It might be something completely removed from meditation, maybe our performance at work, or how we're interacting with other people, or on our cushion. Again, it might come up as one of these other hindrances, such as doubt or uncertainty. So the next, before I finish that on ill will, if ill will is proving to be a distraction during meditation and you really can't concentrate on your breath even for a few moments, it's best to stop your meditation and then to engage in intentional meditation. And there's recordings of that on my website too. And that helps to clear ill will. And then you can pick up your shamatha vipassana meditation once ill will has subsided. The next hindrance to practice is laziness, lethargy, or drowsiness. And if you look at each one of these things, laziness as it relates to Dhamma practice is another way of not being gentle with ourselves, because we're simply refusing to put in the time and the effort to develop a meditation practice, and to develop through right effort the broader framework of the Eightfold Path. And lethargy, or just indifference to what we're doing, is something that first, it's a very subtle aspect of simply not caring enough about ourselves that leads to that type of indifference or lethargy. So it's really, in a very subtle way, addressed first at ourselves. And so if you notice a general way of thinking about yourself that leads to the idea that you're just not worth it. It's important to recognize that, not to analyze it. Analysis in this case does no good. Simply notice that it's something that's standing in the way of your developing the Dhamma, specifically when it comes up in meditation practice. Again, the answer, and this is what the Anapanasati Sutta speaks to this too, the answer is simply to recognize it and come back to the sensation of breathing. That's the most gentlest act we can take with ourselves when we're judging ourselves harshly or our meditation practice, is to simply acknowledge it, come back to the sensation of breathing. Another aspect of this third hindrance to practice is drowsiness, and it's the same thing. When we have a lot of resistance to letting go of wrong views of self, letting go of anatta, letting go of a self-referential ego personality, often the feeling of drowsiness will almost take us directly off our cushion, and sometimes we'll fall asleep, and that's just the extreme example of resistance to staying with the breath and staying with a meditation practice. And again, it's important to recognize. And of course, drowsiness could have simple physical reasons. You just might be too tired. And in that case, it's best to just stop meditation especially if it's later in the day, and pick it up again when you're more well rested. But again, remember that drowsiness, if it's a constant problem on our cushion, it's simply resistance to developing the meditation practice within the framework of the Eightfold Path. The next hindrance to practice is restlessness or worry. And this really is another aspect of boredom, but sometimes it manifests itself that we're just too restless, we're just too edgy to settle and relax, and that restlessness can often give rise to worrisome thinking. We're just consumed with what might be coming up in the future. Maybe it's in the next moment, or it might be the next day. But again, if you remember that we're only meditating for a few minutes, whatever's coming up in the future is going to come up, and there's no sense in worrying about it. Worry is just a negative outlook on the future. In the moment, to come back to the sensation of breathing, and often we'll start diminishing that worry in a very practical way. But again, if you look at restlessness and worry, those are all aspects of not being gentle with ourselves and creating scenarios in our own mind where we simply can't be at peace. The last hindrance to practice is doubt or uncertainty or skepticism, all kind of the same thing. It's interesting that there's a modern school of Buddhism that encourages great doubt. In fact, it talks about great doubt. And this is simply not something the Buddha ever encouraged, to encourage doubt for any reason. But certainly doubt about your own Dhamma practice. If you're doubting yourself or doubting the practice itself, it's a good idea to take another look at the Ratana Sutta and the three refuges, meaning the Buddha, his Dhamma, and a well-focused Sangha. When we recognize the first refuge, that the Buddha, a human being, developed awakening, and he never set himself apart. He never said that he was any type of special human being, in that he could awaken and others couldn't. He always held himself out as an example of a human being that awakened, and he left us his Dhamma. He left us the clear teachings on how to do the same. And being part of a well-focused Sangha, when we interact with other people who are developing the Dhamma and talking about some of their struggles, but also talking about their successes, that goes a long way to alleviating any doubt, along with remembering the Ratana Sutta. Uncertainty is kind of the same thing. Uncertainty is also an aspect of impermanence that often obscures impermanence. In other words, if we are reluctant to look at and let go of wrong views of self, uncertainty will often arise, and that can become almost debilitating. But in being gentle with ourselves, simply recognize that it's present, and in meditation practice, come back to the sensation of breathing off our cushion, continue to deepen an understanding through reading about the Eightfold Path and sharing about that in a well-focused Sangha goes a long way. And skepticism is the same thing. skepticism, doubt, uncertainty, when we're bringing that up within ourselves, is all part of the same wrong view. The other aspect of skepticism is people that we know and maybe people that we care about simply are throwing roadblocks up in our Dhamma practice by trying to instill their own skepticism within us. And again, it's just there to recognize, be very, very gentle with yourself. Understand that these none of these hindrances that I mentioned or that the Buddha taught 2,600 years ago, there's nothing personal about them. They're just simply common aspects of anatta, a mind rooted in wrong views of itself. And by giving into the hindrances, that's a very subtle strategy that a self-referential ego personality employs to continue to ignore its own ignorance. So continuing to ignore the Four Noble Truths is the most harmful thing we can do for ourselves, and the most gentle thing we can ever do for ourselves is to continue with a correct meditation practice framed by the Eightfold Path. So that's today's talk. I hope you'll join me again next Wednesday. If you find benefit from these recordings, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. Thank you for joining me today. Peace.